Welcome to the BotCast.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You guys really want to deep dive into what Trump winning a second term actually means.
You could say that.
Seriously, you sent us a ton of stuff. Articles, analyses, people comparing this to way back in history. You really weren't kidding about wanting to go deep.
It's certainly a fascinating situation.
That's one way to put it.
I mean, just to start off, right, Trump beating Kamala Harris, this wasn't just, your typical election.
Right.
This kind of feels like all these anxieties, all these things that have been kind of brewing, they all just came together.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Honestly, part of me is still surprised he's back in the Oval Office. It's not every day a president wins a second term, but not in a row.
Exactly.
It's been over a century since the last time that happened. And he had a ton of stuff to overcome, right? All the legal battles, the controversies. I mean, come on.
And yet he clearly still has a very strong hold over the Republican Party.
Oh, for sure. But it can't just be about party loyalty, right?
Right.
I was looking at the numbers, and he flipped a bunch of states that went for Biden last time. Georgia, Pennsylvania. He even got more votes in some of those places than he did back in 2020.
That's what's really interesting.
Yeah?
If you want to understand this win, you got to look at those numbers.
Yeah.
Because what it tells us is a pretty big chunk of voters, they really connected with his message. Deeply.
Okay, so let's talk about that message then. Because some of the stuff he was saying during the campaign, well, let's just say it definitely got people's attention.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there was a lot of talk about authoritarian style, this authoritarian style, that. And Trump himself was using some pretty strong language, like calling crime an occupation. Didn't that raise some red flags?
For some people, definitely. But, well, you can't deny it. Those tactics worked. At least for a certain group of voters, he tapped into these fears that are already out there, right? About the economy, about the war in Ukraine, just this general feeling like things need to change.
Right.
And I think for these voters, they're willing to put up with some of the, let's say, the more controversial stuff because they really believe Trump is going to deliver that change, like a real shakeup.
Okay, so what does that change look like? What are we actually talking about here in terms of, what he might do?
Well,
one of the articles you sent mentioned things like mass deportations, huge changes to the economy, even a showdown with the courts over how much power the president has. I mean, is that stuff even realistic?
it's not just hypothetical, though. If you look at what Trump has actually said, these are things he wants to do. And now, with the Senate backing him up, he can actually try to make them happen. And that's where things get really interesting, because now you have to ask, what happens to checks and balances? That whole idea that different parts of the government keep each other in check.
Yeah.
What happens to that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And what about the rest of the world? I mean, Trump's foreign policy the first time around, volatile is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
So what happens now with Putin? And what about the war in Ukraine? He keeps saying he wants to end it. And then there's that whole America First thing. I mean, where does that leave America's role in the world? Are other countries going to follow his lead, or is this going to cause even more tension?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I'm sure a lot of world leaders are asking themselves that right now. I mean, we know Trump's said some pretty positive things about Putin in the past, and he definitely wants to change how the U.S. is involved in that whole Ukraine situation.
For sure.
But while that stance on Ukraine might have won him votes from people who are, worried about things escalating, other people are seeing it as a really risky move, it could destabilize things even more.
It's definitely unpredictable. We're in a completely different world now.
Yeah.
It feels like this second term is going to be just as, unusual as his first one.
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes this whole thing so interesting to look at. We are literally witnessing a presidency unlike any other in American history. I mean, think about it. And the crazy part is, this is just the beginning. We're still figuring out what all this means. It's true, though, every presidency has its own, set of challenges. What's interesting about Trump's second term, I think, is how it all started with this, deep dissatisfaction with the way things are. A lot of voters felt like nobody was listening to them, like the system wasn't working.
Yeah, and Trump definitely tapped into that, right? All that talk about draining the swamp, putting America first. But now he's got to actually, do it. He's got to govern. So let's look at some of those campaign promises, especially the ones that could actually, change things. You flagged a bunch of articles about his economic plans, his immigration policies, what he wants to do with foreign policy. Where should we even start?
Let's start with the economy, I guess. It was the main thing he talked about during the whole campaign.
Right.
And he's talking about some pretty big changes, bringing back manufacturing jobs, renegotiating all these trade deals, putting tariffs on imports, especially from China. He's even talking about like going back to protectionism. I mean, those are some big promises. But can he actually pull it off?
Well, I was reading about how when he tried to do the tariff thing during his first term, it kind of backfired. Like, it started trade wars, and American farmers actually got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's going to try a different approach this time, or is he just going to, like, double down on what he did before?
That's the big question. Some people are saying he'll be more careful this time, because the global economy is kind of a mess right now.
Right.
But there are also people who think he's just going to go even harder on the protectionism thing, especially with China.
Really?
Yeah. And it's interesting because some of his supporters, they're actually okay with those trade wars. They see it as like a way to protect American jobs, to make sure American companies are the ones winning.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, so what about immigration? That was another big one, right?
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about massive deportations, targeting people who are here illegally, maybe even some legal refugees. And then there's the wall, of course. That whole thing caused a lot of drama last time.
Yeah.
So do you think he's actually going to try to do all that again?
Well, he's already signed some executive orders bringing back some of those immigration policies he had before, like the travel ban from certain countries. So it's pretty clear immigration is going to be a big deal for him. Now, whether he can get Congress to go along with the bigger stuff, like actually paying for the wall, that's another story. But he's definitely made it clear that he wants to take a hard line on immigration. No question.
And that brings up another thing you were talking about before, how much influence he might have on the courts. With a Republican Senate, he can appoint a lot of judges, conservative judges. So how could that change things? Like, what would that mean for regular people?
Well, whenever a president appoints judges, it's a big deal. Because those judges are going to be around for a long time. And they're going to be making decisions about things that affect everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Healthcare, environmental regulations, workers' rights, even like the balance of power between the government and citizens. All that stuff ends up in the courts eventually.
Wow.
And Trump has said that he wants judges who think like him, conservative judges. So if he gets to appoint enough of them, it could change the whole way the courts work for decades.
Okay, so that's the courts. What about foreign policy? Trump's never been shy about saying he likes Putin, and he wants to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. He's also been critical of NATO. And he seems to prefer working with leaders who, well, let's just say they don't always play by the rules. So is this going to mean a more isolationist America? Or is he going to try to, like, flex his muscles on the world stage?
Honestly, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, some of the things he says make it sound like he wants to pull back from all the alliances and stuff America's always been involved in. But then on the other hand, he's also shown that he's willing to use the military. And he's not afraid to get tough in trade negotiations. So maybe what we'll see is something in between. Like maybe America will still be involved in the world, but only in ways that benefit America, America first and all that.
That doesn't sound like it would make our allies very happy, though, especially in Europe.
It could definitely cause some problems. A lot of countries depend on the U.S. for, like, protection and economic support. If America suddenly starts putting itself first, it could really strain those relationships. And it could create a lot of uncertainty in the world.
Yeah, I can see that. Some people are even saying it could make things easier for dictators and hurt democracy around the world.
That's definitely a possibility.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second. I want to talk about something that came up a lot during the campaign. Trump's age and health. Like we were saying before, he's 78, oldest president ever. And there were times when he was campaigning where he just seemed, I don't know, off. Like maybe he was tired or couldn't remember things.
Yeah.
They had some people worried that, maybe he's not up to the job anymore.
Right.
Some of those articles you sent, they talked about how he doesn't eat right, he doesn't exercise, he doesn't sleep enough. I mean, is that stuff something to be worried about, or is it just people making a big deal out of nothing?
Well, being president is a super stressful job, so it's natural for people to worry about the president's health, especially when you're talking about someone his age. I mean, we shouldn't speculate or anything, but Trump himself keeps saying he's totally fine. Perfect health.
Okay, but what if something did happen? Like, what if he gets sick or something happens where he just can't be president anymore? What happens then? What are the rules?
Well, there's this thing called the 25th Amendment.
Okay.
It basically lays out what happens if a president can't do the job anymore. But here's the thing. It's never been used in a situation like this.
Really?
I mean, think about it. This is the oldest president we've ever had. and he already lost once. It's totally unprecedented.
Right.
This could lead to all sorts of crazy legal and political problems, stuff we've never even thought about before.
So we're basically in uncharted territory again, just like with his foreign policy. This second term is shaping up to be just as, well, unpredictable as his first one.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating. We are literally watching history unfold in real time, and we have no idea what's going to happen next.
It does feel like we're like at a crossroads. This election wasn't just about picking a president. It feels bigger than that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you can tell just by how people voted. This is about people wanting things to really change.
And Trump, well, he gave them that, right? That idea that he's going to shake things up, put America first.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean? Once all the slogans are gone, can he really fix things?
Yeah.
Or is he just going to make things even more divided?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I keep thinking about that historical comparison, the one with Grover Cleveland, the only other president who won 2 terms but not in a row.
Right.
And his second term, well, it was rough. Lots of economic problems, lots of political fighting.
So are we headed for the same thing? Is Trump 2.0 just going to, make everything worse?
It could happen, but maybe not. Maybe he's learned from his mistakes. Maybe this time he'll be more, practical. Less about making a splash, more about actually getting things done.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. What do you think are the biggest question that people should be thinking about right now?
I think the most important thing is, how is all this going to affect you, personally? Your life, your community, your future, all that stuff we were just talking about. The economy, immigration, what he does with other countries, the courts. Those aren't just, ideas. They have a real impact on people's lives.
Yeah. It's a lot to wrap your head around. This whole deep dive has really got me thinking.
And this is just the start, right? Trump's second term is just getting going. And the decisions he makes now, they're going to have consequences for years, maybe even decades.
Well, that's about it for our deep dive today, folks. We covered a lot, but there's always more to learn.
Definitely. Keep digging, keep asking questions. Don't just take our word for it. Make up your own mind.
That's the most important thing, right? This isn't just about politics. It's about understanding what's happening in the world and how it affects us all.
Trump winning, it was a big no to the way things are. But will he actually change things for the better? Will he keep his promises? Or will this just make things even more divided? We don't know yet.
One thing's for sure, though. The next 4 years are going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Be sure to tune in next time for another, deep dive into something else interesting.
Thank you for listening to BotCast. Remember to subscribe for more captivating content